Wyoming Territory, June 1887. The wind tugged at her skirts as she stood on the lonely rise, eyes locked on the weather-worn cross jutting from the earth. Dust swirled low over the grass, and somewhere far off a hawk cried. Hattie Clarke did not blink. The sun baked the back of her neck, but she stayed still, like if she moved, the weight in her chest might crack her in two. The cross was plain, just pine, the kind a man could shape with a good knife and a broken heart. There were no flowers at its base, only the dry, faded earth and a single stone she had placed there 3 weeks ago. She had not returned since, not until now. Behind her, hooves slowed, she did not turn. "Was he your husband?" a voice asked, low and careful, not too close. She looked down, then touched the edge of the cross with her fingers. "No," a pause, then, "I am sorry." She turned then, slowly. The man sat atop a black gelding, hat in his hands, sun catching in the dust on his boots. He looked like he had been riding a while, coat loose over his shoulders, jaw unshaven, eyes shadowed from travel. But there was something in the way he sat the horse, steady, quiet, like he did not need to say much to be understood. "And if he had been?" Hattie asked. The man blinked, not rattled. "I would still be sorry." She looked back at the cross. "His name was Samuel," she said finally. "My brother, shot south of here. We came from Missouri. He wanted land near the mountains, did not even make it past the first month." The man shifted in the saddle. "And you," she gave a dry laugh. "Still here." He stepped down from the horse then, slow and respectful, like he knew not to crowd grief. "Name's Yates Penner," she nodded once. "Hattie Clarke." He looked at the cross, then back to her. "You got people here?" "No." She turned her eyes back to the grave. "Just that hill, and whatever is left of the dream my brother died chasing." Yates looked out over the land. "Hard country, cruel country." He was quiet a moment. Then he said, "I'll help you heal, if you let me." She turned, brows pulling. "You do not know me." "I know what it is to be left standing," he said, voice steady. "I lost my younger sister to fever last spring, buried her in Dakota Territory. I saw that same look on your face when I lost her." She looked at him longer this time. There was no pity in his eyes, just something solid, something real. "I do not need help," she said, but her voice came out thin. "Maybe not," he said, "but you deserve it anyway." She let the silence stretch. The sun had dipped lower, casting the plains in gold and shadow. "Where are you headed?" she asked. "Nowhere in particular." "Then why stop here?" He looked at the cross. Felt like someone needed something. Hattie's throat tightened, but she turned away before he could see it. "I have a cabin," she said. "Half-built. Samuel started it." "I have not touched it since he died." Yates nodded. "Then that is where we start." The cabin squatted near a creek, half its roof still open to the sky. Boards leaned against one another like they had given up waiting. A small garden plot sat dry beside it, weeds curling through what had once been rows. Yates tied his horse and shrugged off his coat. "You have tools?" "In the shed," she said. "Or what is left of it." He found a hammer, a dull saw, and a handful of bent nails. He touched the wood with calloused fingers. "We can make this work." She stood back, arms crossed. "I do not need charity." "This is not charity," he said. "It is a man keeping his hands busy so he does not think too hard." She watched him pick up a board and place it against the frame. He moved like someone who had built things before, not rushed, not careless, just steady. The next 3 days passed in quiet work. Yates patched the roof, repaired the doorframe, and relit the fire in the hearth. Hattie cooked what little she had: beans, dried meat, cornbread when she found the flour still good in the bin. She watched him from the doorway as he chopped wood, sleeves rolled, sweat shining on his neck. On the 4th day, it rained. The roof held. They sat inside that night, a lantern between them. She had not lit it since Samuel died. "Why are you really here?" she asked. Yates leaned back against the log wall. "I left Dakota because there was nothing left there for me. Came west because I figured if I kept moving, the ache might quiet." "Did it?" He looked at her, eyes tired but honest. "Not until I saw you," Hattie's breath caught. "I do not understand you," she said. "You do not have to," he said. "Just let me be here." She looked down at her hands. "I have not spoken to anyone in weeks." He reached across the space, slow, and took her hand lightly. "Then it is about time someone listened." She did not pull away. For the first time in weeks, her chest did not feel so heavy. They worked together as June wore on. The cabin grew stronger. So did the quiet between them. Yates built a fence. Hattie planted beans again. He found her laughing one morning when a rabbit tore through the rows. "You have a nice laugh," he said. She blinked, surprised. "I do not remember the last time I laughed. Then I will make sure it happens again." She studied him. "You are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone passing through, someone who would not stay." He met her eyes. "You want me to stay?" She looked at the cabin, then the land, then back to him. "Yes," she said. "I think I do." By the end of the month, they sat on the porch together each evening. The nights were warmer now. The air smelled of sage and creek water. Yates reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She looked at him, heart beating fast. "I thought I was broken," she whispered. "You are not," he said. "You are still standing. That means something." She leaned into him then, and he wrapped his arm around her, steady and sure. Under the stars, with the wind whispering through the trees, she let her head rest against his shoulder. And for the first time since Samuel's death, she felt like she was not alone. The days turned dry. July pressed in with heat that clung to skin and made the cottonwood leaves hang still. In the hush of midday, even the creek behind the cabin seemed to hold its breath. Yates had taken to rising early, before the sun crested the low hills. He'd saddle the gelding and ride out toward the east fence line, where a few posts still leaned crooked from the spring thaw. Hattie watched him go from the window sometimes, her fingers curled around the sill, the rest of the house still quiet around her. That morning, she found him near the edge of the property, driving a post into the hard, packed earth with a rhythm that matched the beat of her pulse. She carried a canteen and a small cloth-wrapped parcel, her boots kicking up dust as she crossed the field. "You missed breakfast," she said, holding the bundle out. He set them all down, took the parcel, and opened it slowly. "Didn't want to wake you. I wasn't sleeping." He looked at her for a moment, then took a bite of the biscuit inside. "You always carry food out to strangers working on your land. You're not a stranger anymore." He nodded once, chewing. "Fence won't hold much the way it is. Soil's too loose here. Might have to set the posts deeper." She crouched beside the nearest one, fingers brushing the splintered edge. "Should we move it closer to the ridge?" He studied the slope. "That'd hold better and give you more shade come afternoon." "You thinking of staying long enough to care about afternoon shade?" "I'm thinking of staying long enough to care about a lot of things." She stood slowly. "And if I told you that scared me?" "I'd say fear's got a place, but it shouldn't be in charge." They walked back together, not touching, but close enough to feel the heat rising from each other's skin. The cicadas had begun their rasping song in the trees, and a hawk circled above the far ridge, wings still as sails. That evening, she lit a fire outside the cabin, and they sat beside it with their plates balanced on bent knees. The sky ran soft with color rose, then lavender, then the pale blue of waiting stars. He set his plate aside and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You ever think of leaving this place?" "I did, once." "What stopped you?" She reached for a twig and pressed it into the dirt. "There's a difference between running away and walking forward. I had nowhere to walk to. You might now." She didn't answer right away. The fire snapped, throwing orange light across his face. His hair curled slightly at the temples, damp still from washing up at the creek. "I don't know what I'd be without this land," she said finally. "Even if it's broken me." He picked up a stick and turned it in his hands. "Maybe it didn't break you. Maybe it just made the cracks easier to see." She looked at him, then away. "I'm not sure I'm ready to be seen." "You don't have to be. Just don't hide from me." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of dry grass and cooling ash. She reached for his hand this time, lacing her fingers through his without looking at him. "I'm not hiding," she said. He squeezed her hand gently. "Then I'll stay." Later, when the stars came out full and the fire burned low, she rested her head against his shoulder. Neither of them spoke, and in that silence, something settled between them, quiet as the dark, steady as the land. August came with dust and heat that lingered long after the sun dipped behind the hills. The creek ran lower each day, its chatter quieter now, like it too had grown weary of the summer stretch. Hattie had taken to tying her hair up with a strip of muslin in the mornings, sweat dampening the base of her neck before the second chore was done. She stood barefoot in the doorway one evening, apron streaked with flour, watching Yates carry a bucket of water toward the lean to where the chickens now nested. He moved with the same patient care he used for everything, measuring steps, shoulders loose, hands steady. She didn't know how long she watched before he noticed and set the bucket down. "You've got a look on you," he said, wiping his palms on his trousers. "I found something in the root cellar," she replied. "You ought to see it." He followed her down the slope behind the house, where the small cellar door sat half sunk into the hillside. She lifted the latch and stepped down, the air cool and damp. In the far corner, beneath an overturned crate, lay a cedar box she hadn't noticed before. "I think Samuel meant to keep it hidden," she said, crouching beside it. "There's his handwriting on the edge." Yates knelt beside her as she opened the lid. Inside were folded papers, a rusted compass, and a single photograph tinted in sepia, corners worn soft. It showed a man and a young boy, both seated on a porch, the boy barefoot and grinning, the man's hand resting gentle on his shoulder. "That's us," she whispered. "Back in Boone County, before the war took Pa." Yates picked up the compass and turned it in his hand. "Still points true." She pressed the photograph to her chest. "Samuel never talked much about Pa after we left. I didn't know he kept this. He must have needed the memory." She looked at him then, eyes wet but steady. "You ever miss yours?" He leaned back against the stone wall. He was a hard man, fair but quiet, never said much unless something was wrong. "I miss the things we didn't get to say." She folded the lid closed. "I keep wondering what Samuel would think of all this, of you." Yates met her gaze without flinching. "I'd hope he'd see I mean to stay." They climbed out into the fading light, her fingers brushing the edge of his sleeve as they walked back. Behind them, the cellar door creaked shut, the cedar box tucked safe beneath the earth once more. That night, she didn't light the lantern. Instead, they sat near the hearth, the coals faint and warm. Hattie leaned back against the wall, hands in her lap. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what this place could be." He waited. "There's enough land to keep cattle if we clear that north slope. And I could take in mending again. There's always someone needing shirts patched or hems straightened." "You thinking of building a life here?" he asked. "I think I've already started." He shifted closer. "You'd want me in it." She turned toward him, the faintest smile lifting her mouth. "If you're still offering what you said on that hill, then yes." He reached for her fingers, calloused from work but warm in his palm. "I am." They sat like that a long while, the quiet between them woven with something stronger than words. Outside, the wind rustled through the cottonwoods, and the earth, though tired and sun-beaten, held its breath for the promise of rain. By mid-August, the hills had taken on a brittle cast. Grass turned pale and sharp-edged, the air shimmering above the ridge like a mirage. The cabin's walls no longer groaned in the wind, and the porch they'd finished together held the weight of 2 chairs and a small table where Hattie often laid out green beans to dry. That morning, she found Yates kneeling beside the small corral, pressing his thumb to the hoof of a bay mare that had wandered in from the south trail 2 days earlier. She stood watching for a moment, arms crossed, the sun still low enough to cast long shadows across the dry yard. "Stray?" she asked. "Looks like she was cut loose," he replied, brushing dust from his hands. "No brand I can see, hoof split though, must have hobbled her some." "She trusts you enough to let you touch her." "She didn't at first," he said, rising, "but I waited quiet. Let her decide I wasn't trouble." Hattie gave a faint nod. "That sounds familiar." He met her gaze. "I wasn't talking about the horse." She stepped closer, resting her hand on the top rail. "You reckon she'll stay? If she's got water and no one chasing her off, likely she will." They left the mare to rest and crossed the field to where the garden's edge had begun to brown. Hattie knelt to check the roots of the squash vines, fingers moving with practiced ease. "You ever think about what comes after the first frost?" she asked, not looking up. "I do now." She straightened, brushing soil from her palms. "You'd be all right with winter here. It gets long and mean at times." "I've known mean winters," he said. "But I've never had someone worth staying through one for." She looked up at him slowly, eyes unreadable. "You talk like you've already made up your mind." "I don't need more time to know the shape of what I want." Her jaw tightened slightly. "That scares me more than I'll admit. I'm not asking you to decide everything today. What are you asking?" He took a slow breath. "To let me build a barn before the snow comes. And maybe a future behind it." The wind picked up just then, carrying the scent of dry earth and the distant promise of rain that never quite came. She stared at him so long he thought maybe he'd said too much. Then she asked, "You any good with rafters? Better than with words." "Good," she said, "because if we're keeping that mare, she deserves a roof." They spent the next week hauling timber from the far edge of the property where fallen pines had dried in the sun. Yates fashioned braces and beams, Hattie marking measurements with charcoal on salvaged boards. They worked through cracked knuckles and sunburned necks, the kind of labor that asked more of the heart than the hands. One evening, as they settled beside the creek with their boots off and calves in the water, she let her head fall back against his shoulder. "I used to come here with Samuel," she said. "He'd try to catch frogs and always fall in." Yates didn't reply, just let the silence hold. "But I never laughed the same way with him as I do now." He turned slightly, just enough to press his forehead to her temple. "You think he'd be all right with that? I think he'd be glad I'm not alone." The next morning, she woke to the sound of hammering. Through the window, she saw Yates atop the new barn frame, shirt tied around his waist, hair damp from the creek. She watched him for a long while before rising. Later, after the last beam had been set and the tools hung in the shed, she brought him a tin cup of coffee and stood beside him as they looked over what they'd built. "Could use a paint coat next spring," he said. She sipped from her own cup. "We'll get to it." Her eyes found his. "You're not just passing through anymore." His hand brushed hers, not tentative but certain. She didn't pull back. "I'm here," he said. "I know." And in the long quiet that followed, the last of the late summer heat softened as dusk crept over the land, and the two of them stood side by side, no longer waiting, no longer wondering, just there, together, ready for what came next. The first frost came early. It crept in overnight, delicate as lace across the barn roof, silvering the garden rose that had already begun to wilt. Hattie woke with a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, the windows clouded with breath. She stepped outside to find Yates already at the woodpile, splitting kindling with quiet precision, steam rising from the horse trough where he'd broken the ice. She watched him a moment, arms crossed against the cold. "We'll need to move the preserves down from the loft," she said. "Roof's colder than the cellar now." He set the axe aside and wiped his hands on his trousers. "I'll carry them. You just point where." Inside, the cabin had taken on the scent of smoke and dried apples. The hearth crackled and a thin curl of ash danced up the flue. Hattie stood on the ladder, handing down jars wrapped in rags. Yates took each one with care, placing them into a crate lined with straw. "You ever spend a winter with someone before?" she asked, voice half lost in the rafters. "No," he said. She passed down a jar of pickled beans. "Only with Samuel, and that was different." He looked up at her. "How different do you want this to be?" She paused, one hand on the ladder rung. "I want the kind where the quiet isn't heavy. Where I don't have to explain why I go still sometimes." "You won't have to." She nodded once and climbed down, her boots landing soft on the packed dirt floor. That afternoon, snow fell in fits, brief flurries that melted as they touched the earth. Yates repaired a broken hinge on the barn door while Hattie stitched a tear in the quilt her mother had made before the war. She didn't speak while her needle moved, but her eyes kept drifting to the window, where the sky darkened early. After supper, she sat on the floor near the fire, her knees drawn up beneath her skirt. Yates joined her without a word, stretching his legs out beside hers. The silence held easy. "I never pictured this," she said, watching the flames shift. "What did you picture?" "Nothing. I stopped imagining a future after Missouri. Seemed easier that way." He leaned back on his hands. "And now I'm wondering what spring will look like with someone still beside me." He didn't answer right away. Then he reached over and brushed her sleeve, fingertips light. "I'll be here when the snow melts, and when it comes again after that." She turned to him slowly. "You mean it?" "I do." She searched his face, every line familiar now. "Then I'll stop wondering." The following weeks passed in rhythm, wood to stack, coats to mend. The mare's leg healed enough for her to be let out into the paddock, and Hattie began teaching her to respond to a soft whistle. Yates built shelves in the cabin's back room, where Hattie kept her sewing, and the old compass, now polished and tucked inside a wooden box he'd carved from pine. On the last Sunday before winter closed the roads, they rode into town together. Hattie wore her blue wool dress, the one she'd kept wrapped in oilcloth for years. Yates had borrowed a razor from the general store and showed up at the door clean-shaven, his hair combed back with water. They spoke with the preacher after the service, quiet words exchanged by the steps of the small white church. No one stared. No one whispered. In a town where loss was common and kindness rare, folks had learned to recognize something good when they saw it. That night, they returned home with a folded slip of paper and 2 new mugs. Yates set them on the table, one for her, one for him, and poured cider into both. "To us," he said, raising his cup. Hattie tilted hers toward his. "To what comes next?" He kissed her then, slow and certain, the way a man kisses a woman he intends to love every day he's given. She closed her eyes and leaned into it, her hand resting against the side of his neck where the pulse beat steady. They did not speak again that night. They didn't need to. The days shortened. The snow deepened. Inside the cabin, the fire never went out, and when the first buds appeared on the cottonwoods months later, small and green and full of promise, they stood on the porch together, shoulder to shoulder, and watched the land begin again. They had no need for plans beyond the next morning. The work would come as it always did. But so would the small joys. Bread baked crisp, warm hands after a day of cold, the sound of another voice in the quiet. And together, without ceremony or fuss, they began their life, 2 people who had known grief, who had bent but not broken, who had found in each other something stronger than the sorrow behind them. They were not the same as they'd been when they met. They were something better, something whole.